Aryeh has an MSW, MSSA in community planning from Case Western Reserve University, and an MPH in health and mental health planning from the University of California at Berkeley. He also completed all PhD level coursework in behavioral science research at the University of California, Los Angeles School of Public Health. From 72 to 74, he had a research appointment in the psychiatry department at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. And while there, he authored or co-authored 10 published papers on mental health planning. He started Transcendental Meditation in 1970, became a TM teacher in 1974, and founded and directed TM's Institute for Social Rehabilitation from 1974 to 1978. And I know that there was also a period there where he worked at the US National Office with the famous Jerry Jarvis. He co-authored a study of TM at Folsom Prison, published in the Journal of Criminal Justice and Behavior. From 1981, he directed a large community mental health center in Los Angeles.
I think it's enough, Brian. It's like
we've got it. Okay. All right. We'll leave it there. Suffice it to say that it goes on and on. Okay. All right, Aryeh. Well, we're really looking forward to your talk about scientific integrity and TM, and you have the floor.
Well, with that topic, this could be an extremely short talk because there's very little scientific integrity with TM. And I did write a book about TM called Transcendental Deception, and there is a chapter about the problems with TM research. And basically everything I'll say today is pretty well documented, primarily because I was concerned about the TM organization coming after me, and I ended up spending about $20,000 in legal review of the book before it was published. So pretty much everything in there is well documented. And also, if anybody wants links or biography, bibliography, whatever references, let me know or let Brian know, and I'll get them to you. So with that said, let's just begin this with a statement by a guy named Dr. Drummond Rennie, who is a very well-known psychologist and a researcher. And he wrote the following about research. There seems to be no study too fragmented, no hypothesis too trivial, no literature too biased or too egotistical, no design too warped, no methodology too bungled, no presentation of results too inaccurate, too obscure, and too contradictory, no analysis too self-serving, no argument too circular, no conclusions too trifling, and no grammar and syntax too offensive for a paper to end up in print. So that's basically a pretty interesting statement from somebody who is in the game. So we all know, and basically everything that Brian talked about in terms of my academic background was like 50 years ago, and I pretty much forgot everything. I had to relearn a lot of it when I wrote my book, and that was a quite interesting experience, because the reality for me was I wasn't really, when I left TM and stopped meditating, I wasn't really angry with anybody. It just didn't work. I had the cities for about 4 years already, was doing my program faithfully twice a day for 2 hours a day. Wasn't really getting any results. I didn't think it was worth the time, and I just stopped doing it. I also left the movement on fairly decent terms. I wasn't really angry with anybody. The person I worked with most closely was Jerry Jarvis. My mentor was Charlie Lutz. They were all at my wedding with the barrels, and it was really a great time to be in the TM movement. We were located first on Gailey, then we moved out to like Malibu, the Pacific Palisades. It was really a wonderful place to be at the time, and people were normal. I had just for reference, there was a weekly poker game at my house with the leaders of TM, not Jerry and not Charlie, but pretty much everybody else was playing poker, and everybody was going to movies, and people were, and our friends were kind of normal. So like things, and like what really happened with me was I ended up stopping to meditate after I'd been doing it for about 10 years. And pretty slowly, our friends changed from everybody being a TM friend to other areas of life. And I really lost track of the movement to the point where I didn't hear that Maharishi had died until 2015, which was about 7 or 8 years later. So it gives you an idea, like really how far away I was. And I started getting back into this because in 2015-16, pretty all of a sudden TM, it kind of like was everywhere. I guess what had happened was for a big period of time, Maharishi went inward and started selling everything to his teachers with the cities and the various courses and gemstones and all the Ayurveda stuff, whatever. And there was no really emphasis on the general public. That changed, and I started seeing TM everywhere. And then I started seeing that the David Lynch Foundation wanted to teach TM to 1 million public school kids. And by that time, I was more involved with the Jewish religion, and I knew from my TM background that there were a lot of aspects of TM that really didn't comport with monotheism. And the more I looked at it, the more I decided that I wanted to do something about it, which really was why I ended up writing my book. So that's kind of background a little bit. So where's TM now? Essentially, we all know that like one of the TM's main sales pitches is that there's been millions and millions and millions of dollars in government money from National Institute of Health and NIMH to support TM research. And the reality is that's true. There was a tremendous amount of money that went into TM research because 30 years ago or more, TM looked like a very promising intervention, and it was taught in a uniform way, and there were teachers available, and it was very easy to do some studies. So basically, until 2010, TM really led the field in funding for meditation studies. From 1992 to 2010, NIH, that's the National Institute of Health, gave a whopping $23 million to Maharishi International University. And if you add in the grants that they got before 1992, it really was in the area about 26 to 30 million dollars. Now we're talking about if you look at the value of that money today, that probably is about, I would guess, 45, 50, $55 million in research funding. It's a very, very substantial amount of money. But here's what happened. Essentially, after 2010, all the funding pretty much stopped. Between 2010 and 2016, and afterwards, NIH didn't give any money to TM organizations. the National Center for Complementary Health and Alternative Medicine had given $7.7 million for research through 2004, nothing after that 2004. National Heart Blood Lung Association gave an astounding $12 million in research grants to TM between 1992 and 2010. After 2010, nothing. So that's all the government money dried up. If you look at what's happening today, currently, because I ran these figures yesterday in preparation for this talk, there's a website called clinicaltrials.gov. This is an online database of all clinical research studies with information about their methodology and where there's results with the results. It lists the principal investigators, and the purpose of it is to allow the general public, researchers, and healthcare professionals to just put in like some kind of a parameter and see what kind of research is going on in that area. So I plugged in Transcendental Meditation. What I came up with was the total number of studies on the website was 25. The number of studies currently recruiting were 2. One of them is a study of post-traumatic stress disorder, which I'll get into. And the other is a study of stress among women in Lebanon, being run by a professor at MIU, a lady, I don't know her name. The website has a total of 16 completed studies. 9 of them were sponsored by MIU. Of the other active study, the one on post-traumatic stress disorder, that one is sponsored by the David Lynch Foundation to the tune of $8.2 million that they put into that study. Now, keep in mind, I said total number of studies, 25. If you put in mindfulness training, the number isn't 25. The number is 1,283 current studies going on. There are not 2 recruiting. There's 226 recruiting. Active studies not recruiting, TM has 0. Mindfulness training, 63. Completed studies, TM 16. Completed study mindfulness training, 713. If you look at the relaxation response, which was developed by Herbert Benson, most of you are familiar with Benson. He did some of the original work with Keith Wallace. When I was at the TM Center, when I was working for TM, Benson was like the hero, because Benson talked about the health benefits of TM, because that's what he was researching. And Maharishi, being the marketing genius he was, understood that health would sell much better in the West than spirituality, and the entire organization shifted focus to health benefits. Now, Benson became TM's worst enemy when in 2004, he published an article in a scientific journal basically saying that you didn't need the TM mantras and didn't need the puja to get the results. All you needed was the technique. And he basically demonstrated that you could get the same physiological signature with just, he started off with using the word 1. And then as he did further research, he found that if somebody did a word that they liked or that was from their tradition or whatever, that they stayed with it longer, they got deeper effects. Now, Benson was, he traveled to the Himalayas under the auspices or the aegis of the Dalai Lama with his team and with 2,000 pounds of equipment. And they did very, very serious measurements of yogis, and it was an extraordinary amount of work that he did. His first book sold over 4 million copies. It was translated into like 17 languages. It was on the New York bestsellers list for like 2 years. It was a self-help bestseller for like 7 or 8 years. So he's a very serious person. If you look, and he set up a research institute called the Benson Henry Mind Body Institute that's at Mass General Hospital and Harvard. The number of studies, if you put in relaxation response, 321, currently recruiting 67, active not recruiting 10, completed 178. So we're going to have to compare that to 25, 2, and 16. So basically, you can essentially see that the research world is not at all concerned with TM, and basically the only research that gets done at all, if it gets done, is if the David Lynch Foundation at this point, or Maharishi University or whatever, self-funds it. So nobody is really interested in TM research. That's, or I shouldn't say nobody, but very, very few. Another point to be made, and if anybody has any questions on any of this, this could be more interesting if people ask questions along the way, but I'll just get through some background stuff and then we can open it up more. There's a website you can Google called TM Free Blog. It was one of the first anti-TM blogs that was put together by a guy named Mike Dory. He is a brilliant guy, and he has really done a lot of analysis. One of the things he did was to analyze all the TM research. He started with the 700 studies or whatever they say were included in the various promotional materials, and he broke it down. One of the things he found was that at the peak of its popularity between the 70 and 80, something like 39% of the studies that were done involved TM researchers. So that's 39%, okay. From 1991 to 1918, to 2018, 95% of the studies involved TM researchers. For 2 5-year periods between after 1991, 100% of the studies were done by TM researchers or affiliated or participants. And at no point during that period did the proportion fall below 90%. So now you have almost all TM research being done by TM affiliated movement people. So like you can make your own conclusions about could bias possibly enter into the picture in interpretation of results, especially when the TM organization is the one who, by and large, does the data analysis. And I'll get back to that more because this is a very, very interesting conversation. So now he said when he did his research, he felt that he looked at the tm.org website, and there were 160 papers listed. From his perspective, 37 of them didn't qualify as original research for various reasons that he discusses. And of the remaining 123 papers, 83% of them were a study in which at least one author had a documented institutional connection with the TM organization. And of 21 additional studies, 17%, you can't easily connect it with the TM organization, but it just wasn't clear. Some of them could be, some of them may not be. So when TM says that there are, and they have on their website all over the place the logos of various universities and research centers, and when they claim that there's studies done at 200 independent universities and research institutions, the numbers, the reality just doesn't hold up. And you see that the people who did the research overwhelmingly had experience both with the practice themselves, with the vast amount of ideology and doctrine that comes with long-term involvement in TM and everything that surrounds it. So that's that's his take. If you go to his website, there's a 5-part study on TM research that goes through what does it mean to for peer review. It goes through a lot of analysis, and it's very, very excellently done. Okay, now let's go to another part of my talk, which basically is that TM presents itself as better than everything else. There's no meditation, there's no anything that's as good as TM. TM is the solution to everything, essentially. That's how it was when I was involved with TM. That was what was put forth. That was the party line. There's a thing called the meta study. A meta study is where you have like a lot of disconnected research, but on the same topic, and there's not enough data to do the kind of analysis you would like to do. There are statistical ways to combine various studies and to then have enough data in different cells to do analysis. So one of the main ones that was done was by the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, that was done by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. And it was carried out by the University of Alberta Evidence-Based Practice Center. And their goal was to assess the therapeutic effect of meditation on hypertension, cardiovascular disease, substance abuse. And this meta study, what they found was that of the 800 studies that they looked at, almost all of them were characterized as poor quality methodologically. That means that they just were bad research designs. And I haven't looked at research designs for 50 years, but it kind of came back to me because I did spend 3 years of my life very, very involved in behavioral science research. So the poor quality data limited the number of comparisons that they could do, but what their conclusion was that TM had no advantage over health education, which was one of the control groups, to improve blood pressure, body weight, heart rate, stress, anger management, cholesterol, dietary intake, or the level of physical activity in hypertensive patients. So they found no differences. Then there was another big meta-study, a huge meta-study done by Johns Hopkins, which basically looked at meditation programs for psychological stress and well-being. And they reviewed over 18,000 studies. Now imagine this, 18,000 studies, and only 47 of 18,000 studies met their criteria for inclusion in the research, which basically was you needed to have like a randomly assigned control groups. That's kind of the gold standard. What you try to do in research is you have two groups that are very, very close in terms of a number of parameters, whether it's education, race, sex, substance abuse, if that's what you're looking at, psychiatric issues, whatever high blood, whatever the things are, you have a big pool of people, and then you have a system of randomly assigning those people to either the study group or the control group, the test group or the control group. And then you try to give the people in the control group something that is something that they see as useful, so that they're not just kind of like not doing anything. And then at the highest level, the person who's doing the actual data analysis doesn't know who was in each group. They just get the data and they do it, and somebody else later figures out was a person a test subject or control subject. So this study, out of 18,000 plus studies that they looked at, only 47 were in the random control group category, and only 8 TM studies qualified to be in, as opposed to 36 mindfulness studies at the time. So basically, there's a couple things to be said here. One is that meditation research is methodologically challenged, and hopefully it's improving. I'm not really that up with it now, but there were big problems with methodology. That being said, this study concluded that mindfulness meditation showed small improvements in a few areas, while other meditation programs, which included TM, had no demonstrably better effect on any of the variables studied than any other therapies to which they were compared, such as drugs, exercise, or behavioral therapies. So that's kind of where things are in terms of like the scientific world at that point. So if there's a question, let me know and I'll try to answer it. But let's go on, because this is where it kind of gets a little bit more current and I think more interesting. As many of you know, Bob Roth had a best-selling book a few years ago called Strength and Stillness. And if in a certain point in the book, he writes about that he wants to talk in some detail about some of the truly breakthrough research documenting the unique and profound benefits TM has on health and stress. Now, when Roth was talking about the breakthrough, he was referring to a study by Dr. Robert Schneider, who many of you may have heard of. He's like the dean of the College of Maharishi Consciousness-Based Healthcare at Maharishi University of Management. And the title of his study was Stress Reduction in the Secondary Prevention of Cardiovascular Disease, a randomized control trial of transcendental meditation and health education in Blacks. So you have these two groups randomly assigned. They're all Black, and they're dealing with testing the difference between TM and health education. Schneider, in discussing this study, and again, I have all the references, so it's all documented. Quote, "These findings are the strongest documented effects yet produced by a mind-body intervention on cardiovascular disease. The effect is as large or larger than major categories of drug treatment for cardiovascular disease." So that's an interesting statement. The only problem is that 12 minutes before the Archives of Internal Medicine was going to publish the study, they pulled the study. That is extraordinarily rare for a study to be pulled just minutes prior to its publication. So that raised some questions that were investigated by a guy named Larry Houston. Houston is a PhD researcher. He frequently writes for Forbes magazine, editor of cardiology news for Cardio Exchange, which is published by the New England Journal of Medicine, editorial director of WebMD, which is one of the major websites on medical care and for the public. So he started looking at it. And the first thing he said when he investigated it was those promoting the research were, quote, clearly guilty of gross scientific exaggeration and misstatement. Then he went and had another cardiologist who's an expert in clinical trials, Sanjay Kaul. And Kaul said that a study with barely 200 patients cannot be expected to provide broad answers about the health benefits of a novel intervention. As Kaul and others have stated on many occasions, extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and it is quite clear that the evidence in this trial is not extraordinary, at least in any positive sense. And moreover, even though no studies had compared the effects of meditation on statins, which is the most widely used pharmaceutical treatment for elevated cholesterol, Schneider told WebMD, what this is saying is that mind-body interventions can have as big an effect as conventional medications such as statins. They didn't measure statins. They didn't do a study of statins in TM, but here he was, okay. Then, although it was limited to Afro-American population with heart disease, Schneider generalized this thing, saying that this builds on previous research findings that shows transcendental meditation reduces high blood pressure, high cholesterol, insulin resistance, psychological stress, and atherosclerosis, and takes it to the next step, lower rates of death, heart attack, and stroke. And then this TM website, TM Home, said, to see the long-term effects of TM to lower blood pressure, we studied a group of patients with heart disease, half learned TM, half served as control group. We followed them for 5 years. Those doing TM had a 48% lower rate of heart attack, stroke, and death than men and women with similar physical conditions. So I have a question. If there was an intervention that somebody came out with and said, this intervention is going to cut heart attacks by 48%. If it said it was going to cut heart attacks by 3%, you would have researchers all over the world jumping on it, trying to replicate the results. But that didn't happen here. So why not? Well, Houston offered some explanation. He said the results are at best hypothesis generating and tell us nothing about the actual value of TM. Only 200 people were randomized in the study, and most studies with hard clinical endpoints require thousands of patients. And a cursory examination of this paper raises all sorts of red flags. Now, he goes into like detail about the problems with this particular study. And I'm not going to go into it with you because it gets really pretty technical. But I do include it in my book. But his conclusion is, when the baseline differences were included in a secondary analysis, the results were no longer significant. In other words, to use the old cliche, they tortured the data until they made it talk. Now, that's a pretty heavy statement. Now, so torturing the data, they made it talk. This is like pretty interesting. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff with the American Heart Association, because if you listen to Tony Nader when he puts on his medical hat, he talks about TM being the only meditation that's ever been demonstrated to have a clinical impact on hypertension. So in Strength and Stillness, getting back to Roth's book, he says that in 2013, the American Heart Association looked at years of research on TM and concluded in its journal Hypertension that TM is the only meditation technique shown to lower blood pressure. Now, Robert Brooke is a research physician at the University of Michigan. He chaired a 12-member panel that was put together by the American Heart Association. And this is what he wrote. He said, numerous alternative, now we're talking about like, this whole discussion is on adjunctive therapies, things that might help heart blood pressure, in addition to like the kinds of standard medical interventions, whatever they may be. But he said that the strongest evidence supports the effectiveness of using aerobic or dynamic resistance for the adjuvant treatment of blood pressure, biofeedback techniques, isometric hand grips, and device-guided breathing methods are also likely effective treatments. Notice that meditation isn't mentioned as having a positive effect on hypertension. The authors concluded that more and better studies are needed to determine what impact, if any, TM had on hypertension or offered any advantage over any other meditation techniques. This is a quote from the study. The overall evidence supports that TM modestly lowers blood pressure, although it is not clear whether it is truly superior to other meditation techniques in terms of lowering blood pressure, because there are few head-to-head studies. Now, the American Heart Association had a classification of the various different techniques. One of them was that the TM got really a very mediocre classification. Level 2, class 2B, which was reserved for treatment modalities lacking well-established and useful efficacy data. The TM people, I think Schneider might have been one of them, wrote to ask that the category be changed. They wanted a higher category. That was very gently refused. They did not change the category. But because TM was mentioned explicitly in that statement, even though the rest of the statement said there's no evidence it's better, the TM organization framed that statement in its promotional activities. Not that statement, but basically the statement I read you before that was in Roth's book, that TM is the best of everything and nothing compares to it. So because of that, the American Heart Association had to react, and they wanted to clarify that while not, they basically saying that the benefits of meditation remain to be better established. Their new statement said, overall studies of meditation suggest a possible benefit on cardiovascular risk, although the overall quality, and in some cases the quantity of studies are modest, and given the low costs and low risks of this intervention, meditation may be considered as an adjunct to guideline-directed cardiovascular risk reduction by those interested in this lifestyle meditation, with the understanding that benefits of such intervention need to be better established. Now, TM did not stop pushing the American Heart Association quote, endorsement, non-endorsement as their promotional studies. So in 2019, the American Heart Association tried to remove any ambiguity, and they issued the following statement as an add-on to the 2017 study. The registration number for Transcendental Meditation is whatever it is. Is owned by the World Plan Executive Council. Okay, this form of meditation listed in the article is only an example of meditation. This is not intended to be an endorsement of any commercial product, process, service, or enterprise by the American Heart Association. But of course, that was disregarded by the TM organization, and they continue to this day to claim that TM is unique in reducing hypertension. Now, I won't belabor this, but there were other critiques of it. One of them by Greg Farno, who heads the Amundsen UCLA Cardiomyopathy Center at UCLA, and he talks about the problems with that study that Snyder referred to. Now, what's very interesting, and here you get into like the crux of it, when you have people who only want to promote something instead of like do objective studies. Here's what Schneider said in another article. One of the reasons we did the study is because insurance and Medicare calls for citing evidence for what's to be reimbursed, Schneider said. This study will lead toward reimbursement, and that's the whole idea. So now Houston quoted that in his article, and he said, for true believers like Schneider, fighting heart disease is important only insofar as it can be employed to further the interests of TM. Scientific standards and medical progress are unimportant in the larger scheme promoting TM. So that's it's pretty heavy because basically you're dealing with people who have serious life-threatening conditions. And the way TM can be promoted is just start this and you can disregard everything else. Although that's not, obviously, they don't say that directly or in writing, but that's kind of the message you get if you go to a TM lecture where TM is like the be-all and wherewithal to solve all the world's problems. So that's one area where it becomes dangerous. I want to talk about a couple of other areas where it's really, really vile in my estimation. And I'm scanning my other computer because I don't keep all, thank God I don't keep all this in my head. Let me just take a second to find this. There was a study on, where is it? Oh, there was another scientific study of children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD. And basically, if you're going to characterize the study, it should be titled "How the Power of Suggestion Helps 10 Children with Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder." So here's what happened. This is like so just vile. This is totally vile. On the tm.org website, when I was doing my research, there was a category called TM and ADHD and how it's helpful. And what it was a clip of an ABC local news report where the reporter does two things. It starts off by saying that parents are very, very concerned about the dangers of medication for their children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And these medications have lots of problems and parents are very dangerous. And now there may be a solution. And what's the solution? Maybe meditation can replace drugs. And then she continues with Dr. Serena Grossfeld, who, by the way, is a TM teacher, describing her study of TM and ADHD. Now, the study had 10 students between the ages of 10 and 14. It was published in an online journal run, I think, by some students. I think it was a student publication. The study was so flawed that it was ridiculed in an article called "How to Design a Positive Study, Meditation for Childhood ADHD." And here's a quote from this article. The flaws in this study are numerous. The number of students is subject too small. There's no control group. It isn't blinded. The study reveals that some of the children are on medication, but it doesn't take into account the possibility of changes in medical therapy or improved compliance during the study period. It's based purely on self-reported and subjective questionnaires, and there's a likelihood that a placebo effect could have been the sole responsible factor in the subject's apparent improvements. Then the author who wrote this saw a video of Dr. Grosswald describing her study, and he further commented, "A more concerning red flag, and one which was also discovered in a talk given by Grosswald, is the fact that the 10 children involved in the study may have been coached. In the last few minutes of the presentation, Grosswald presents clips of children meeting with the TM teachers, proponents, prior to initiation of the study, where it appears that they are told what the expected outcomes of the trial will be, and that their symptoms will all improve with TM. So now you have like the issue of expectation bias added into the hopper. Then she says, not only are these kids age 11 to 14 being told the expected outcome of the study by the study investigators, the headmaster of the school can be seen at the very end discussing how amazing the technique is and how it's going to change the students' futures for the better. Now, by the way, the headmaster of the school happens to be an advisory board member of the David Lynch Foundation. It's just really interesting. Okay. So he says, I'm forced to question whether the teachers whose evaluation the study subject's behavior and performance are an integral component of the study conclusions of the positive effect might have been hesitant to give a negative evaluation when their boss is clearly a true believer. Now, he goes on. He says that the placebo effect could have been responsible for everything. Even before instruction, kids are told over and over again how great TM is, calming, beneficial, relaxing, be better in school. And the truth of the matter is nobody wants to be the one to say it doesn't work, because kids are very influenced by their peers and by the cues that they get from adults. So, it's very hard for a kid to stand up and say, you know what, especially to an adult who they know loves it, this really isn't working for me so well. So what was very, very interesting was that I was looking at the comments, and many of us know Peter Stuckman, and Peter wrote a great comment on this study. I didn't know who he was at the time, but I put him in my book. He said, this is a quote from Peter. I'm also an intelligent guy who happens to be a clinical psychologist who knows how to read research, and my doctorate is not from Mayru. When I see pilot studies like this presented as proof of a causal relationship between TM and shiny bright teeth or whatever, it makes me furious. You idiots, do serious research. In this case, 10 subjects without a control group. Are you guys nuts? This doesn't mean anything except some weak correlation. I actually use this study in my psychology classes to show what crappy research is. If you believe TM is so robust and has a positive effect on everything, then do good research, not this silly pilot study nonsense. Now, that leads to another point. Almost every study on TM is short-term, essentially pretty much 3-month pilot studies. And that's really the bulk of it. Not that there aren't some longer-term ones, but pretty much everything is. Oh, and then on the TM benefits on the same website, there was a title that said TM and the autism spectrum. And that research was, I don't know if it's still there, a video of a mother who discusses how TM helped her autistic kid. That was it. There's no other evidence, nothing, just this video of one mother talking about it. Then there's another category, TM and insomnia. The only thing is, when you look at the studies, none of them dealt with insomnia. And one of them wasn't a study at all. It was a talk by David Orm Johnson, who was one of 23 speakers at a conference something like 25 years ago. There's another category about depression, and none of the studies really dealt with depression, as far as I could see. And then there's a category in addiction. There wasn't one study that was older than 25 years old. So there was a lot of issues there.
So hi, Aryeh. Great to have you here.
Hi, Judith. Great to be here.
You praised the quality of research that Herbert Benson did, and I am curious to know what were his results.
If you go on his website, which is called the Benson Henry Institute for Mind-Body Medicine.
Mm-hmm.
There are, and you go in the research section,
Mm-hmm.
there's 100 studies that were done at Harvard and Mass General Hospital, indigenous medical centers, and others like Duke,
Mm-hmm.
go into a variety of research areas.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is in terms of changes at the cellular and genetic level, and other are in more behavioral kinds of things,
Mm-hmm.
but some of them dealing with various medical issues. They really document how the Benson technique, which is essentially TM, is really the TM technique without the puja and
Mantra.
mantras, has an effect when combined with medical treatment. And their guidelines are different. So, for example, if they are looking at the effect on blood pressure, they're not saying that their the relaxation response cures high blood pressure. They're saying it could knock it down a few points, and that may enable people to possibly lower or get off their medications, which is a big plus, is a big win. And the other thing that they talk about is that it's not a one-off kind of thing. Meditation is part of what he describes as a three-legged stool, which also would include medication and where required surgery. So it's part of a medical practice. It's not promoted as a be-all and end-all, and they're not really trying to sell it because they don't charge for it. You can Google Benson teaching relaxation response and get it for free, or read his book. I mean, it's like essentially very, very simple to find. So there's no financial component or incentive. And actually, his center was funded by the owner of the Boston Red Sox. His name is Henry. His last name is Henry. And the Boston Red Sox Foundation has a wonderful program for treating post-traumatic stress disorder, mostly concentrated in the greater Boston area and the northwest, but also down in Florida. And they provide medical treatment, psychological, psychiatric treatment, medications, recreation for families of veterans and active duty military with post-traumatic stress disorder and with traumatic brain syndrome. And there is no charge whatsoever to anybody for any of their programs or treatment. It's all by the Boston Foundation, and it's called Home Base. And if you want to look at something that's really great dealing with these issues, it's a good place to look.
And would we find that if we go on Benson's homepage? Would we find the connection to that?
Yeah, all you have to do is Google Home Base.
Home base.
Whatever, you'll find it. It's not. It's there. If you can't find it, I'll send you a link. It's not a problem.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, my pleasure.
Hello, everybody. I just want to give some of my own experience with this. I remember being skeptical of TM research even when I was teaching back in the day, because I had enough training in social science in college to look at the studies that we were asked to present in our naive way. And I remember thinking, wait, aren't we making a little much of a study that had like 9 subjects, all of whom lived in Fairfield, Iowa? You know, it was a little off. Years later, when I was doing my own research for my own books, I got to know a lot of the non-TM scientists who were reading the same journals and doing studies and going to conferences. And I would ask them what they thought of the TM research. And it was very interesting. And I remember one conversation, especially with Roger Walsh, who was a very well-known psychiatrist and kept up with all the research. But what I would hear from many of them were that a lot of the TM studies themselves, the scientists could look at and say, well, you know, they had double-blind protocols, they were peer-reviewed, so as studies, they can be granted a certain validity. Their main problem was the interpretation of whatever data the TM people came up with, because they were, I heard consistently how upset they would be at the proselytizing and what was made of a limited study that might, in other hands, be presented with a certain humility as a preliminary data or something that called for more research. The TM scientists were clearly disciples first and scientists second, and were making more of the research than the data would allow. The exception to that, according to the people I spoke with, was usually Skip Alexander, who they had a lot of respect for. But everybody else was considered a devotee and a proselytizer. And that's one of the reasons. And the other was the refusal to allow non-TM people to duplicate the studies. They did not get a whole lot of cooperation when they said, oh, this looks interesting, we'd like to do it independent of you. And they would get very little a cooperation, if any at all. So I just thought I would share that perspective from people who take meditation research seriously and compare the two. The other thing I want to add, though, is that I'm also very skeptical of Benson's research. I was a subject, actually, when I was hanging around the Cambridge TM Center. I was a subject in one of his early, I think the study he did with Keith back in the day. And those of us who were around Cambridge and knew him, we knew he was an ambitious guy. And it's not entirely true that there was no personal gain in coming to the conclusions he does. And I would love to have somebody subject Benson's research to the same level of scrutiny that we're looking at the TM research for, because I'm skeptical about it. I'm willing to be convinced that it's all objective and, properly handled and all that. But the equation of TM and relaxation response always gave me trouble, even with all my problems with the TM movement and its research. So I think we should reserve judgment on that at the very least, and subject it to some more, scrutiny if we're going to take it seriously. But thanks, Aryeh, for all your good work.
So let me try to respond to you a little bit. First of all, I think all research, including Benson's, needs to be scrutinized. You were around Cambridge. I don't know how long ago that was, but if you go on their website, there's 100 studies. Most of them are within the last 5 years, and they're not done by Benson. Benson may be like an author, but most of them are done by psychiatrists and neurologists and other medical professionals that are doing the research. And some of it's really, really good. Some of it they tried to do, and they just said they couldn't do it. For example, they tried to do a study on post-traumatic stress disorder, and they just couldn't keep the group together to get enough people in the final analysis phase. So it's just behavioral science research is tough. I mean, I'm being hard on TM, but it's really, really tough to do. You're dealing with a lot of people, a lot of different issues. When you start dealing with people who have post-traumatic stress disorder or addictions or whatever, the ability to get them back to do follow-ups and whatever is very, very difficult. But that's but I think that they are not trying to sell the Benson technique. I mean, he passed away last year. I was at a conference that they put on at the Harvard Medical School, a 3-day conference on meditation techniques. And they are interested in everything, yoga, Tao, whatever, exercise, meditations, mindfulness. It's a total smorgasbord. And they're really, I think, sincerely trying to figure out what works and what works the best. I think that that's really the attitude there. There's nobody's trying to sell anything. And if you talk to people about whatever the issue is, I think you get a pretty honest response from people.
Well, thanks for that. I'm aware that my impressions are a couple of decades old or longer.
Yeah, and I hear that. Now, you did make a comment about one of the criticisms being like sharing data sets. And that is a big problem because people who publish in a scientific journal have a ethical obligation to share the data set with other researchers to see if their results can be replicated. That's major. Now, there's a guy named Barry Markowski, PhD in sociology from Stanford, recently retired professor emeritus at the University of South Carolina, 200 studies that he published in refereed top-of-the-line journals. And he was very involved with trying to get the data set on the Jerusalem study that Brian linked for this group. I asked him to link it because the guy from Israel, in his response to why the Israeli research institutes were not cooperating with TM on the Jerusalem study, is pretty profoundly, not profoundly, but it just really analyzes in quite a bit of detail the problems that people have in dealing with the TM organization and what goes on with them. But Markowski, he said that he had asked also to review the data set of the Israel study. And I sent him a note saying, here's this study that was published in this International Occult Journal that talks about the Jerusalem study. I don't know if you've seen it. So he wrote back and he said, if you look at the end of that study, at the end of that paper, there's this long, detailed analysis by the Israeli guys why they wouldn't participate, and then there's this like rebuttal, point by point, by David Orm Johnson. Fine. So I sent him that, and this is what Barry wrote back to me. He said, I could only read a few words of OJ's rebuttal. It brings back such a familiar twinge. I once had an extended 10+ letter exchange with him, trying to get him to share the raw data from the Jerusalem study so that we could validate their findings and test alternative models. Standard procedure, but even more important when the claims are so extraordinary. They're ethically bound to share data for any published work, but over and over he refused, each letter making up a new excuse. The most laughable was that I was biased, as if the authors of the study were not. After something like a year, he shared data with me, except some key parts were left out and I couldn't do the replication. After a few follow-up requests, I gave up. Sometime after, and he refers to this article that he published in Social Forces, a journal. OJ published a rebuttal somewhere because that journal that his article was in rejected the rebuttal, in which he declared that he did share the data with me. That stretched the meaning of the word share, which was so typical of my experiences with him. He tried to make me look like the liar, when in fact, he absolutely knew he was lying. There was a time in the 1990s when I respectfully disagreed with the conclusions of the Maharishi effect, but remained ever cordial to OJ and Alexander, and took them out to lunch and had them speak in my department. Now I feel like a fool, but I'm glad I didn't waste too much time on any sort of follow-up. I can't say much about other TM researchers, but OJ was far worse than merely self-deluded. He would do or say anything in the service of the mission, even knowingly lying and hurting people. I would call that evil. Now, I wanted to post that somewhere, and I wrote to Barry and I said, do you have any objection to my posting that? He said, no, nothing's changed. It's true. I stand behind it. The other thing that he talked about was a note to me. I wonder if there's anyone out there who has concluded that the Maharishi effect is legitimate, who is not, one, personally entangled in any way with TM, has the time and patience to review the work thoroughly, and is actually qualified to evaluate the finer points of social research methods and high-level statistics. The fact that there are so few, especially with respect to two, is how deceptions and delusions remain unchanged over the decades. So it's a pretty heavy statement from a very, very serious guy. Let's talk about the Maharishi effect. This is like okay. So let's talk about let's start with the Washington and the Washington D.C. study, and they were that's going to prove that TM would revitalize America by having all these meditators come to Washington D.C. and they were going to reduce crime by 20%. And we all know that became like the centerpiece for what was going on. So there's a couple of very interesting things that came out of that. One of them, there's a book by a guy named Robert Park called Voodoo Science, and he described a press conference before this experiment began, in which John Hagelin explained how crime reduction would be a scientific demonstration of the proof of a unified superstring field that attempts to connect all the forces of nature, and that all these advanced meditators in the same location would get into like collective consciousness, and this was going to be an effect on crime rate. So Park in his book says, so while meditators serenely went about their practice, the Washington Post made a tally of Washington DC's weekend murder rates on each Monday morning. Over the period of the study, the highest murder rate occurred in the city's history. At a press conference held when the study concluded, Hagelin acknowledged that the murder rate had increased, but he emphasized that brutal crime was down. Noting the absurdity of Hagelin's comment, Park pondered the benefit. murderers shot their victims with a clean shot between the eyes rather than bludgeoning them the old-fashioned way. Then the following year, Hagelin came up with a 55-page report on the experiment. At the press conference, he claimed that violent crime dropped 18%. So the reporter from the Washington Post said, 18% reduction compared to what? Hagelin said the actual crime rate compared to the crime that would have occurred without the meditators meditating. And how did he know what that rate would be? He said by using a scientifically rigorous time series analysis that included not only crime data, but such factors as weather and fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field. And then he added that an independent scientific review board, several members of which were present at the press conference, had examined and validated the study. But questions from reporters revealed that the independent reviewers were all followers of Maharishi. So while Park did not question the sincerity of those involved, he noted people will work every bit as hard to fool themselves as to fool others, which makes it very difficult to tell just where the line exists between foolishness and fraud. Then another theoretical physicist, Peter Walt, who at the time was in the mathematics department at the university, at Columbia University, said Hagelin's study has since been rejected by virtually every theoretical physicist in the world who evaluated it. Andrew Skolnick, who's a noted medical writer who wrote for the American Heart Association, said, indeed, it took Hagelin 6 years to find a journal willing to publish his much ridiculed Washington, D.C. crime study. It's not impossible to get a flawed and bogus science published in a research journal. It just takes longer. It's just like, he says, from time to time, even the most shoddy science ends up in a journal. So that was, then it goes through like, how Maharishi changed from 1% when he realized that like in America, you with whatever the population of America was, you'd need like 3 million meditators to give the 1%. He did the square root of 1%, it was 1,800. And so like, there was probably most of you guys know Earl Kaplan, his brother David. They gave between the two of them $150 million to Maharishi, and they had total access to Maharishi because of the money. And at one point, Earl said to Maharishi, "Look, like we have the money. Let's do a permanent 10,000 group in India. It'd be like a tenth the cost, and we can keep it going." And Earl said at the time, they were buying fleets of airplanes and spending tons of money and everything. The money was there; they could do it. Now, this is a guy who had at that time given about $150 million to the movement. This is like at a time when Maharishi was saying that if we only had 10,000 a permanent group, the world would change. Everything would be different. And he said, I remember saying to Maharishi, we could do this. And the money's there. And he said, Maharishi looked at me like I was an idiot. And he said, Earl, don't you know that like first we'd have to get the group together and then like see what the results were. And he said at that point, it like really just struck me. He said like there was really no basis for it. It was just a money-making, money-generating, money-grabbing scheme. And there was never any serious anything about it. It was just like all, well, that's what he said. Now, there were other scientists who concluded the Maharishi effect was nonsense. One of them was a guy named Heinz Pagels, executive director of the New York Academy of Science. And there was a guy named Robert Kapinski who was a longtime TM teacher, and he had a lawsuit against TM for physical, psychological, financial damage that he had suffered. And Pagels wrote a letter to the court affirming what he characterized as willful deception by the TM organization. So here's what he said about the Maharishi effect. This is like pretty powerful stuff. Given my summary opinion as a theoretical physicist specializing in the area of quantum field theory is that the views expressed in the literature issued by Maharishi International University and appearing in World Government News and other publications associated with the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi that purport to find a correlation between the recent ideas of theoretical physics, unified field theory, the vacuum state, and collective phenomena, and states of consciousness attained by transcendental meditation are false and profoundly misleading. No qualified physicist that I know would claim to find such a connection without knowingly committing fraud. While I am not an expert on the meditation techniques advocated by the Maharishi, I have experience in studied meditation methods in Buddhist and Hindu traditions. There is no known connection between meditation states and matters of and states of matters in physics. Individuals not trained professionally in modern physics could easily come to believe, on the basis of the presentations in the Maharishi literature, that a large number of qualified scientists agree with the purported connections between modern physics and meditation methods. Nothing could be further from the truth. The notion that what physicists call the vacuum state has anything to do with consciousness is nonsense. The claims that large numbers of people meditating helps reduce crime and war by creating a unified field of consciousness is foolishness of a high order. The presentation of the ideas of modern physics side by side and apparently supportive of the ideas of the Maharishi about pure consciousness can only be intended to deceive those who might not know any better. Reading these materials authorized by the Maharishi causes me distress because I am a man who values the truth. To see the beautiful and profound ideas of modern physics, the labor of generations of scientists, so willfully perverted, provokes a feeling of compassion for those who might be taken in by those distortions. So that's a pretty heavy statement. Now, one of the things that I did to try to check out the Maharishi effect so many years later after the Washington study, and I wasn't even aware of the Jerusalem study at the time, was I want to see like what was going on in Fairfield, Iowa, like in terms of crime. Now, at that time, there was the Golden Dome, so you had a lot of people doing their programs there. And I'm talking about like 2016. I think at that time there were also 1,000 or 1,200 pandits chanting away. So that should have had a pretty hefty effect on the crime rate, especially since if you took the square root of the population of Fairfield, the square root of 1% of the roughly 10,000 person population of Fairfield at the time, and probably still roughly the same, you needed about 10 siddhas. Clearly, there were more than 10 siddhas. There were probably 50, 60, 100, 200, I don't even know what the number was in the dome at various points in time. Plus, you had all the pandits. You had 1,200 of them. I don't know what they were doing, but possibly they were chanting or doing something or whatever they were doing. So you would think that Fairfield would have pretty decent crime statistics. In fact, there shouldn't be any crime in Fairfield. There shouldn't be any crime in Iowa. There shouldn't be any crime in the entire Midwest. So I went into a real estate platform that analyzes crime rates, and it's called Neighborhood Scout, and they get their crime statistics from the FBI crime lab. And basically, this is available to realtors for a fee. And you pretty much know, like if you're going to try to sell somebody a house in a certain area, you're not familiar with it, you want to know about the schools, you want to know about the whatever, employment, whatever, you want to know about the crime rate. So here's what they said about Fairfield, Iowa. Now, I don't know if this is still true. This is like from basically 2015 or 16. The crime rate in Fairfield is considerably higher than the national average across all communities in America, from the largest to the smallest. Although at 32 crimes per 1,000 residents is not among the communities with the very highest crime rates, the chance of becoming a victim of either violent or property crime in Fairfield is 1 in 31. Based on FBI crime data, Fairfield is not one of the safest communities in America. Relative to Iowa, Fairfield has a crime rate that is higher than 94% of the state's cities and towns of all sizes. So that might call into question the effectiveness of all these coherence-generating siddhas on crime rate. So I think that that's probably enough said. I don't really need to go into much more, although I have quite a bit more. But I think that that's probably enough.
Would it be okay to ask a question, please?
Absolutely.
Sure.
I had to cut out for a bit to deal with my business and answering some questions, so I apologize if this was already answered. Going back to the original Keith Wallace research, is that equally flawed?
The Keith Wallace research really was more on physiological stuff, and of all the TM research, probably the best research is on the physiology stuff. So I would not critique Keith's research. I might have other issues with like the attempt to correlate brainwave coherence or lack of coherence with various issues, like whatever they might be. But the basic study on breath rate and respiration and those kinds of parameters, I think were quite well done as far as I can see. You know, it's very interesting. Like I know there's like a really negative talk about TM, and mostly from my perspective, it's the way the research is used. I think that goes far beyond what the actual research statement finds. So that's my main critique. That's not to say that meditation doesn't have a salutary effect on many different issues. The reality is that if somebody gets sick, the first thing physicians say is, or whoever, get rest. Hospitals are probably the worst place to get rest in the world because you're always interrupted. But the idea is that to go and get some rest. So if you can get like really deep rest and you get it twice a day, it should have a good effect. So the problem is that the research is crap, but the reality is that the research is crap in mindfulness also, and a lot of these things, because it's tough to do the research. Now it gets worse with people who are trying to sell a product. Then you get into all these other issues where I'm really down on TM in particular. But that may be because I don't know mindfulness so well. Maybe many of the same issues exist in that as well. So if we want to did I answer your question?
Yes, you did. And that was my sense. I'm a medical scientist, and my sense was that Keith's, work on alpha waves and all of that was well done, and not overextending it and the other stuff. I didn't know, I'd not followed this, that the NIH had given them the equivalent of $26 million, and now you're saying it would be about double that. That's I understand, that they wrote apparently convincing grants for that, but it's really outrageous in many ways, and it's outrageous the way the information was used, and that it's I don't know. I'm sure we all agree it's pretty repulsive.
I don't know how people agree with me or not, but but anyway, I'm just trying to present, my point of view, and I'm, willing to consider having my mind changed. There's no question about it. I just think that from what I've seen, it's not a very good picture. Let's switch focus a little bit in terms of how TM deals with researchers that they aren't exactly happy with. So let's talk about the problem of side effects, and I don't know what the current perspective or party line is about side effects, but when I was involved with TM years ago, they were minimized. There are no side effects, or if there were, they're rare, and if there were, they were always due to some kind of a pre-existing condition that really had nothing to do with TM, and that was essentially what the party line was. I don't know if people disagree with that or not, but that was how I remember being taught in terms of what to say about side effects. So back in, let's see. All right, so let's just start with this. First of all, when you talk about side effects in TM, the reality is that most of the people, and there are people who've had disastrous side effects from TM and other meditation practices, including some of the Buddhist meditations like Vipassana. It's a reality, but almost the vast majority of these side effects and difficulties come, but not exclusively, but most of them come from people who are meditating for significantly longer periods than 20 minutes twice a day. People who have been on rounding courses and our course, we're meditating, I don't remember, 8 to 10 hours a day. I remember one woman jumped out a window and died. We were told that if anybody talked about it, they'd be thrown off the course immediately. I heard that there were other events like that, but there are a lot of side effects, and these side effects are really known to the TM organization, because if you just look at the checking notes and what the checking notes say, first of all, it's like what you tell the students, basically different kinds of experiences, almost no matter what they are something good is happening, just keep meditating, or in really serious instances, not to ever stop meditating, just cut it back to 5 minutes or whatever it is. There's never just stop, it's not working for you. This is going to get worse if you continue. And we're talking about, in the checking notes, talk about things like debilitating, frightening experiences. You're told that it's stress release and you don't resist the system. Symptoms are beneficial. And this is what the checking notes, shaking becomes violent and seemingly out of control. Just open your eyes and wait till the shaking stops. And if that's not enough, if severe problems arise, the teacher can inquire if they've seen a doctor. And I don't know, is there ever been any documentation that any of this is related to the release of some kind of a physical thing in the body? I don't know. If there is, I haven't seen it. And the problem becomes when TM doesn't do a hell of a lot of screening about who comes into the practice. And so, for example, you have a lot of people who like will hear a TM lecture, which basically says we're the be-all, cure-all for everything. People may have some serious problems who come in to learn TM, and those problems are not necessarily assessed very thoroughly by the TM teacher. And there really isn't, I don't think, a big mechanism to screen people out. When I was a teacher, I think you just wanted people not to have used drugs for a couple of weeks, and then they were good to go. I guess if somebody said they had some, I don't even remember what would happen if somebody said they had a psychiatric disorder. We probably would have taught them just thinking that TM will make it better. I don't remember, honestly, so I don't know what the current deal is. But I can say that when TM opens itself up to, like, say, veterans with post-traumatic stress disorder and gives a message that they are going to do better, well, the problem with post-traumatic stress disorder, many of the people who have it are on pretty heavy antipsychotic medications. In many instances, they may be having recent suicide ideology. There may have, or maybe not. But the problem with a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder is there's a repression of experiences that they may have had during combat, which could be being wounded, being part of like an explosive device, seeing their friends die or get shot up. War is very heavy, and people put this stuff down. And like what happens is when your mind starts settling down, some of these things may start emerging, and they may trigger very, very, very heavy things. And if there isn't somebody around to help them work it through, the consequences can be very, very devastating. I've had a number of conversations with Willoughby Britton at Brown University, who's probably like I would put her in the category of the or one of the world experts on problems that arise from various types of meditation. And she says, look, we get the fallout here. We get the ones who don't make it. And the reality is that if these things happen, TM teachers are not by any stretch of the imagination equipped to deal with these problems. So there's a problem there in terms of like making it available to the general public and saying there's really no side effects. There's everything's going to be fine. Just meditate, and that's going to get better. So that's one issue. And like I was talking about, like you have like more problems with people meditating longer periods of time, and that's where more the issues come in. When I was a teacher, like we used to try to upsell like residence courses, where at that time people were meditating more frequently, and then the idea was to go to teacher training, and then like all the rails were off in terms of hours of meditation. And then even today, like I think I read some of the guidelines from 2004, like the first like governor recertification course, that the program for governors was 6 hours a day, 3 in the morning, 3 in the afternoon. So I don't know if there's problems with the governors or not. Maybe not. I don't know. But like there certainly was an encouragement for people to medicate longer periods of time. Now the alarm bells started pretty early. In 1976, a researcher named Arnold Lazarus wrote that in fact, when used indiscriminately, there are clinical indications that the TM procedure can precipitate serious psychiatric problems, including depression, agitation, even schizophrenic decompensation. He also described a suicide attempt by a 34-year-old woman after attending a weekend TM course. And he noted encountering several people who alleged that TM exacerbated their depressive affect, and agitated individuals and restive individuals have reported the basic procedure of repeating the mantra tended to heighten their ongoing tension and restlessness. Michael Persinger in Canada was another one who did research and talked about side effects, and he talked about the meditation is he felt was contraindicated for subpopulations such as borderline schizotypal dissociative personalities, those who display fragile self-concepts. Okay, so like, great, but like if you don't have a way of screening those people out, you're going to get them. Okay. Another early one was Leon Otis at the Stanford Research Institute. So he writes that all the data suggests that the longer a person stays in TM, the more committed a person becomes to the TM way of life, the greater likelihood that he or she will experience adverse effects. This contrasts sharply with the promotional materials promulgated by the Students International Meditation Society, the International Meditation Society, the World Plan Executive Council, which was my employer, and related TM organizations that TM is a simple, innocuous procedure. Our data raises serious doubts about the innocuous nature of TM. In fact, they suggest that TM may be hazardous to the mental health of a sizable proportion of people who take up TM. Now, a final word appears justified regarding SIMS, Students International Meditation Society promotional mature efforts. SIMS advertises that the results of TM results in beneficial effects for anyone who takes up the practice and performs it correctly. It is hoped that SIMS will publicly recognize that problems may be engendered by meditation and so instruct potential initiates, as well as offer guidelines to both the general public and the psychotherapeutic profession for their amelioration. Most needed in this field are reliable instruments and more rigorous, well-controlled studies, blah, blah, blah. Now, here's a very interesting thing. This is going to lead to another discussion we're going to have. One of the early attempts to stifle critiques. In his study, Otis took a very unusual step. He added 6 statements to the study. There's 2 of them that I thought were very interesting. Number 1, TM, the parent organization of IMS, International Meditation Society, the parent organization of TM, circulated a rebuttal to the article to all its teachers in the United States without allowing the author to respond. A disillusioned teacher informed the author that teachers were provided with standard answers to the points raised in the article, especially those concerning the possibility of adverse effects. Point 6, another of the 6 points. Since this paper was written, similar data was analyzed for individuals who had been meditating for between 6 and 12 months in both SIMS and teacher training groups. The SIMS sample, 92 people, reported an increase in antisocial behavior, approaching 9%, and anxiety, about 7.5%, and a decreased restfulness of sleep in 6.5%. These are substantial numbers. There's not to be ignored. The teacher training sample had increased anxiety 6%, depression 5.3%. So that was Otis at Stanford. Another group in 2020, much more recently, talked about adverse effects on meditation and practices, and their conclusion was, we found that the occurrence of adverse effects during and after meditation practices is not uncommon and may occur in individuals with no previous history of mental health problems. These results are relevant both for practitioners and clinicians and contribute to a balanced perspective of meditation as a practice that may lead to both positive and negative outcomes. Now, the most thorough and most negative study of TM was the German study. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it. It was undertaken by a German government ministry. And it was based on reports that were coming to German authorities by parents and spouses and ex-meditators of the very, very heavy side effects of TM practice, especially in terms of long-term practice, people practicing much more than 20 minutes twice a day. This was a study that involved long-term meditators, parents, their significant others, their therapists where they were available, and it was such a devastating study that the TM organization tried to stifle it, and it really went to one of the high German courts, the Federal Republic of Germany, and there's a case number that said that they were allowed to publish the findings, but TM fought this like crazy. Now, they found that 76% of the long-term meditators experience psychological disorders, including 26% nervous breakdowns, 63% serious physical complaints, 70% a worsening ability to concentrate. And researchers found a startling drop in honesty among long-term meditators. Very interesting, considering what we know to be going on in the current TM world with the way it's being run. The findings revealed that many meditators experience severe disturbances, including disturbed sleep, anguish, problems with concentration, hallucinations, feelings of isolation, depression, oversensitivity. And 70% of the meditators said mental disturbances had originated from meditation. And whether they were ordinary meditators who had little contact with TM or more committed, many of the complaints were similar. And the investigators reported that the meditators were left helpless. They received no help from their TM teachers. And they said that the mainly positive experiences in the earlier stages of meditation, pictures, feelings of happiness, are replaced in time, according to reports of ex-meditators, by terrifying images and feelings of fear and anguish. This is known to the TM movement. Follow-up procedures for TM students experience serious problems, almost non-existent. Regardless of the experience, just keep meditating and something good is happening, were the TM teacher's most common responses. Instructions that often added to the already dangerous situations that many study participants could not resolve without outside help. There's also talking about physical problems, lack of ability to make decisions.
Unknown caller.
Very, very heavy stuff. So like that was not a very positive study for the TM world, to say the least. There were some that hit closer to home. For example, Tony De Niro, who was a professor at TM, but mostly he was the legal counsel for Maharishi University. He wrote an affirmation. I forget who he wrote it for, but it was a sworn affirmation in which he wrote that many of his students were spaced out, unfocused, zombie-like automatons incapable of critical thinking. The consequence of regular and intensive meditations were so damaging and disruptive to the nervous system that his students could not complete many of their assignments. In his affirmation, he said he witnessed a system. This is at MIU, a system of avoidance and denial and outright lies and deception to cover up or sanitize severe problems on campus. These included nervous breakdowns, episodes of dangerous and bizarre behaviors, threats and attempted suicide, and homicidal ideation, psychotic episodes, crime, depression, and manic behavior that accompanied rounding activities. So that's like from an insider professor who wrote in a sworn affirmation about what was going on from his observations. There's more. We all know about the student who was murdered in the cafeteria and what the circumstances were regarding that, which horrendous, just horrendous. But I don't want to go into detail with that. I do want to talk about a few other things in terms of shutting researchers down. David Orm Johnson has a website, Truth About TM. In my review of what goes on there, I say that that's not a very accurate characterization of what's going on in that website. But a couple things are very interesting that really stand out. There was a guy named, there was a professor named Dennis Rourke. I don't know if any of you are familiar with him. In '87, he had for 5 years, he had been hold on one second.
Are you on your thing? Okay.
For 5 years, he had been the dean of faculty and chair of the physics department of MIU from 1975 to 1980. And he wrote a letter to Pat Ryan describing his criticisms of TM. He wrote this letter in 1987. Much of it talks about like how the studies that relate TM and physics have, he's a physicist, have no reasonable basis and are in many ways fraudulent. And he talked about the EEG tests purporting to show increased brain coherence while doing yogic flying. And he talked about the almost impossibility of measuring very weak electrical signals that come from an array of electrodes attached to somebody's scalp while the guy's hopping around. And he referenced the advertisements that claim that the flying meditators had this brainwave patterns, and he just said it's just ridiculous. And he went on to talk about that. So like what Rourke said was, I found then, and I continue to find such claims preposterous. This is what is normally called crackpot science. Moreover, addressing TM's assertions based on false science and spiritual theories, he concluded that individuals who desired only an effective relaxation technique were exposed to real dangers and misleading philosophy and metaphysics claimed by the proponents. Now, David Orm Johnson took a couple shots at him on his truth about TM. David was the senior author of the study that Rourke so roundly criticized. And David said that Rourke misunderstood the methodology of the study. Now, perhaps realizing the weakness of his that response, given Rourke's stellar credentials and his position as the chairman of the physics department, David went on to do a little bit of a personal attack. He said that he accused Rourke of having suppressed the findings of a TM study that he had conducted before joining the faculty of MIU that showed that TM had no impact on one particular type of stress. And according to OJ, Rourke wanted to avoid disappointing Maharishi with negative results, and he claimed that Rourke hadn't performed any research in his 5 years at MIU, asserting that the physicist had avoided research because of his guilt over suppressing the outcome of his prior study. And then he said he portrayed Rourke as a fundamentalist Christian with bigoted views about different kinds of spiritual experiences. This is a quote from the Truth About TM website. I think, this is from OJ, I think he was viewing MIU through the lens of his own conflicted feelings. He may have been projecting, to use the jargon of psychology. I also heard that after he started speaking out against MIU, he became, or always was, a Christian fundamentalist. And I imagine that he may have had some conflicts in that area also, because the fear and apathy toward other cultures that some fundamentalist groups instill in their followers. So the critique is basically because Rourke didn't understand the design. He had guilt feelings because a study he did before joining the faculty didn't find the TM worked in one area, and he was a Christian fundamentalist. Now, De Niro, who I talked about before, who was on the faculty of MIU and chief legal counsel, in his rebuttal to the sworn affirmation, David Orm Johnson took that on also. So instead of accusing him of being a religious zealot, he dismissed De Niro as insignificant, contending that no one from MIU remembered De Niro. I hardly knew Tony De Niro at all. And several other faculty members that I talked to don't even remember his even being there. So Johnson lacked any solid rebuttal, so he deflected the accusation, saying that De Niro wasn't equipped to talk about the research process, that I didn't know him as significant in this context because he, being a lawyer, was never involved in research. So he is hardly in a position to comment on the research project, on the research process. Even if he had heard second or third hand accounts, I have not heard any specific instances cited by him to back up his claims, which are untrue. I mean, it's like the only problem was that he says De Niro is lying and he doesn't know what De Niro said. De Niro's 24-point indictment of TM, which did reflect deep insider knowledge on what he considered to be the TM organization's pattern of fraud and deception, and giving his impression that Maharishi had a cavalier attitude toward reports of people being seriously damaged, and who attributed their damage to TM practice. De Niro never once mentioned research in his paper. He didn't say he was a researcher. So why is David Orm Johnson talking about his research? He doesn't deal with what De Niro is talking about. He deals with a straw man that doesn't exist. So that's the kind of thing that goes on. And there's a lot of other examples also, but I can stop with those and see if there's any more questions. The major initial program of TM in the public schools was in San Francisco, and there were 5 schools involved, and there were about, I'm going to say, close to 3,000 students involved. And the Lynch Foundation was funding the whole thing, and they were also teaching all the staff for free and doing different seminars and whatever for them. And then Lynch started pulling out some of the money, and basically nobody was really after those programs legally. They just died a natural death. The schools just said, we're not getting anything really significant out of this. They put continuation of the program up to a vote in one of the schools, and 28 of the 30 teachers and staff voted to get it out. So that died a natural death. The same Establishment Clause issues that are involved with the schools are also involved with the Veterans Administration. The Department of Defense actually gave $2.2 million to study TM and post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was done at the San Diego Veterans Administration Hospital. They started off with 67 people in the TM group. When they finished 3 months later, there was like 50. So they lost quite a few people, but that's to be expected when you're dealing with this population. It wasn't a study to see if TM was better than, it was basically a study to see if TM was as good as one of the standard standard VA treatments for post-traumatic stress disorder, which was like client-centered behavioral therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, present-centered. And basically that's not really a very well-loved intervention by veterans, because it consists of essentially showing them videos of very, very traumatic situations and trying to help them work through feelings that it brings. And it's just very painful. And there's a lot of dropouts from that. The VA is really doing a number of other things. But that study, I mean, just like the problems are so incredible. Like, for example, you would think that if the Department of Defense was putting $2.2 million into a study for like 67 people, okay, there was no follow-up after 3 months. So like you have this study and you don't know if people are still meditating 6 months later. And I think we pretty much all know that if you ask people like that, like you mentioned TM, so many people say, yeah, I did that. I used to do that. The dropout rate is really, really significant. I mean, TM has records of a lot of people. I guess a lot of people have moved and whatever. But if they really wanted to find out what the dropout rate is, they could certainly do it, certainly after a year or 2 or 3 when they had it, but they don't really want to know because I think the dropout rate is pretty high. So what happened was the Lynch Foundation decided that, look, everybody knows TM can't compete in the marketplace. There's just no way that you can charge. I think we're at $2,500, then they dropped it to $1,800, then to $1,500, and now it's $960. But if you whatever, you can get it for $550, and you don't just tell them you can't afford it. And I think it's kind of like you bring like a loaf of bread and they'll teach you TM. It's kind of like there's nobody starting. Like they're struggling to keep 3 teachers going in Florida, and maybe 4 or 5 part-time teachers in LA, and like you've got like what was it called, calm.com, or the other one, Headspace. At one point they were signing up 40,000 people a day. It's like and millions of people doing it currently, and with a bunch of like 5-minute meditations on helping people sleep better, and you pay $100 for lifetime support. It's like so there's no way TM can compete. So like basically the whole idea with the schools was not that TM loved students. It's just like they were hoping that schools would pay for TM instruction, just like they're hoping that and desperate that TM that the VA paid for TM instruction for post-traumatic stress disorder. So the Lynch Foundation decided to give the VA $8.2 million to do in my opinion, what would have been a very well-designed study with 450 meditators at a bunch of different TM medical centers, VA medical centers, and do a significant study. Now, from my perspective, instead of just doing the VA, if they were smart, instead of just doing TM versus some kind of a present-centered therapy or whatever, do it against the relaxation response. I mean, if you find out that the relaxation response works as well as TM and it's effective, which maybe it is for certain people, then it's basically you can teach it for free instead of like giving TM $1,400 per vet, which adds up very quickly. 67 vets in the study was like $100,000. It's like there's like hundreds of thousands of vets with post-traumatic stress disorder. Pretty soon it becomes real money. So like if you can check out, but the TM to my knowledge, TM has never agreed to a head-to-head study with relaxation response. Maybe that's something that should be done. But what happened was TM, Lynch Foundation, gave the veterans $8.2 million to do this study. The study went to the internal review board of the Veterans Administration. It languished there for almost 2 years without them making a decision. I did a Freedom of Information Act on that study, and they were trying every which way but Sunday to get that study going, and to the point where they brought in an ethicist to help them figure out how they could not disclose what TM was all about and still be ethical. It's just the bottom line was the general counsel shut it down. It seems like on the basis of the potential violation of the Establishment Clause, separation of church and state. So not to be stymied, they pulled it out of the VA and then went to Columbia University and said, we'll give you $8.2 million to do the study privately. And there's the Columbia got involved in bringing in like 7 other sites, including Brown University, UC San Diego, UC, Stanford, this thing called Northwell, and whatever. There are a number of sites. So far, 5 of those sites learned what TM was about. Now, it's like 3 of them learned what TM was about and dropped out of the study. Stanford dropped out, Brown dropped out, or was never in. It's hard to tell the difference. And Mount Sinai Hospital, which was another site, dropped out. So I think there's like 5 or 6 sites left. And I think it's going to, before this gets much further, some of those sites will also drop out when they really begin to understand the cultishness of the TM organization and what they're exposing veterans to, especially veterans that have like some really, really traumatic situations going on. This is probably the last group of people you want to involve in a big study where there's clearly no major follow-up. I mean, when the VA was doing it in San Diego, at least the veterans were all part of the VA healthcare system. So even though the study wasn't following them to see if they were still doing TM or what was going on after the 3 months, at least they're in the system. So if they have any problems, they could come back and get the care. I don't know what the situation is with these the ones that they're recruiting now to these various universities, and the fact that they're using Facebook to recruit participants is also very interesting, because do you think that like somebody who responds to a Facebook ad for a study might be different from some general guy who has post-traumatic stress disorder and really doesn't know what Facebook is or doesn't use it? I mean, I don't know, there's a lot of issues, but the reality is that when you have an organization that pretty much the only way they can get somebody to study it is to provide the funding, that says something pretty clear about the state of research in that organization.
I'd just like to express the appreciation of all of us to Aryeh for a most well-researched and detailed and well-presented, very generous talk today, which I think will be the basis of something really profound going forward. So, and everybody would like to silently clap and hold your hands up. I think we're all very, very grateful to Aryeh.